Welcome to the Resilient Human Services Leader. I'm Craig Maki, Chief Strategy Officer at Provisio. I'm excited to launch this three-part series on modernizing funding strategy for technology in the age of AI. Over the next 3 episodes, we're looking at the essential pieces of the AI funding journey. First, we're starting with the budget and how you can work within the limitations of grant-based accounting to secure funding for innovative technology like AI. Then we're going to talk about building the necessary relationships with those funders who have the money available. Because as we know, just filling out a good application isn't the whole story. There's another bridge to cross with the all-important relationships. And finally, we'll be closing the loop with how to harness your data to begin the funding cycle again. Now, back to what we're talking about today. We know technology plays a direct role in how services are delivered and how organizations prove impact. The challenge is that the funding rules aren't always very friendly for innovation because compliance expectations can still feel very rigid and black and white. This conversation is to help you operate your budget in the gray so you can secure funding for the technology that you need. To help unpack that, I'm joined by Chris Shue, co-founder, dear friend of a nonprofit financial consultancy called the Tereo Group, and he was the former CFO of Trellus, in addition to a number of other financial-related roles he'll speak further about. And as a nonprofit executive who understands the financial side of things, he helps nonprofits navigate the rules that come with modern technology investment. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Craig. Thanks for having me.
And I have the wonderful pleasure of knowing you over several years, so I know a background that maybe you could share with the rest of the world of where you started in financial services and how you ended up in nonprofits in the role you're in today. It would be a great part of your journey I'd love to hear more about.
Yeah. Well, I've always, for 15 years now, been serving the nonprofit sector. Started in everyone's favorite place as an auditor, and did that for just about 10 years, and then realized that you can only do so much as an auditor. So really took a step forward into the advisory side of serving nonprofits, and then have really over the past 8 or so years been kind of anchored to grant-funded social service agencies and grant-funded nonprofits, helping them not only build financial strategy, but helping them align their financial strategy with their strategic plan or their operating strategy. And that's been a real joy just to see the impact of organizations and helping them align those two things has been really fruitful.
From your auditor days and experience to where you're at now with helping sort of programs and organizations think about technology, let's start where I think most people all know or begin, which is the old arcane IT is an overhead expense. Thus, we don't do much with IT except for those things that we have to, and we invest when only somebody else is willing to pay us for that. And how do we take those rules, that mindset, and adopt them to a world that is no longer willing to accept technology as an afterthought rather than an essential tool? Just like we had essential workers, we've got essential tools, and to think about doing your job without technology sounds kind of nuts. But the budgets and the rules don't match that. So how the hell do you even get started?
Yeah, you're spot on, Craig. And that's, you mentioned essential workers. And I think an important part of this, I think, framing, we don't even have to go that far back. We can go to 2020. We can go back 6 years. And if Craig, you and I were discussing at those times, hey, your video conferencing tool, Zoom or 365, is an essential service for program delivery. If I said that to you in 2019, you would have been like, "You're nuts." No, it's not. So I think we have to take the attention off of the software or hardware or the infrastructure, and we have to really understand how do we deliver our programs, and what tools do we need to deliver our programs. And that is, I think, where we sort of get it backwards. We say, hey, we're going to do the same thing the same way over and over and over again, and we're going to ask the funder to fund the same exact things because we're not evaluating, assessing, and building and modernizing our programs, if we're not modernizing how we operate and integrating those into how we deliver our programs, then of course IT is just overhead. But we have to first position and integrate those into what we're doing programmatically. Once you do that, it is a very clear path to getting those things funded.
All right. Well, now that you open the door, tell me more about said clear path. That doesn't feel clear, I don't think, um, in a lot of situations. Like how do you reimagine that and then make everything sort of sequentially thereafter follow suit with that logic model or theory that you're using of reframing?
Yeah, no, it's spot on. And I think like anything, it's best served in kind of bite-sized pieces, right? It's not a kind of something we can just think organizationally. But if we take individual programs and we think about what are essential supports to run the program? I'll get it out of the conversation of AI. I hope we get there because that's an important one. But let's just think about something we all understand that's consumption based, electricity, right? If we were to talk about do we have to have electricity to do our work? Most places that I know of would say, yeah. Is 100% of our electricity programmatic? No. There's things that go into overhead and operations and things. But absolutely, if we have a clinical site that we're opening or operating to see patients or see clients in, it is all those allocated utilities, which we're consuming to do the work, are programmatic. Whereas for me in my office, in the finance office, that is clearly overhead, right? And what we're not doing is this is a key word, if I could underscore it for everyone, joint cost. There's very specific guidance. The guidance is actually very clear on this of what is a joint cost, meaning it applies to both program and overhead functions. And we need an allocation method to say, do we understand how we're consuming it, how we're using it, and then can we allocate that across programs and overhead? When we do that, I think it becomes very straightforward. We have a consistent methodology, we understand how it's used, and then we allocate that and get it proportionally funded. And that's been a game changer for organizations, not just in the technology space, but all of their joint costs. There's a bunch of them.
I think it's probably part and parcel with that uh, paradigm shift that you're really moving your budgeting process from a survivalist mentality to a let's assume we're successful and
Mm.
what do we need to get there and how do those two things dovetail together? Because all too often I think I've hear in conversations that people are uh, somehow over imagining that technology is the silver bullet of which they're now going to become innovative to then become that, when I think I hear what you're saying, which is no, that's a philosophical adoption and a methodology change that has to occur before you start worrying about which technology and how much of the technology and buying more of AI consumption. Like those are all secondary questions to this first real methodology change, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think you're exactly right. A scarcity mindset in how you approach your budget is not a strategic one. And we have to have a strategic mindset. We obviously understand anyone that's in the grant-based world, especially with sort of constraints on federal appropriations and spending, it's a hard life to survive in. It's a hard world to survive. So like survival is kind of table stakes. But if that is our only conversation, is how do we get through 1 year at a time, we're not able to make strategic decisions. And we have to first understand the 3 and 5 year direction, and then we can get that down to 1 year decisions that allow us to manage tight resources and tight budgets and funding cuts even, but not compromise long-term strategy. And what ends up happening is they talk long-term strategy, they being nonprofits, we've all been in the boardrooms, and we don't bring that down to our process, our budget. That's our 1 year plan. We stack those 1 year plans up. we should be getting to where we want to go. And to your point, we've got to stack up how to fund it. Not only how to fund the adoption of whatever technology or whatever change, but we have to fund the ongoing cost of those things. And those happen over the course of 2 to 3 budget cycles, not one.
Patience, I guess, comes into play, huh? As does with the most challenging things in life. Uh, I help me then kind of understand or tie together that sort of you have this front end change in how we manage things. So that's a different plan. But you still have the grants that you have 9 times out of 10 that you've been having, you're going to continue to have. And then there's the new grants we're going after that we have the ability to write maybe some things into it that we didn't in the past around technology. And then there's always that other group that's we got to go get a $500,000 grant from somebody. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to afford this technology. Otherwise, there's no point in it. And somewhere between all three of those is the reality of the cocktail you got that's probably in front of you at your organization. And so how do you marry the new methodology with the review of your current grants, your in the pipeline, and then your private philanthropic? We know there's going to be gaps and we got to find somebody to fill them.
Yep.
How do you put that together?
Yeah. You point out all of the pieces, and sometimes they can feel like they don't fit well together, and that's absolutely right. So taking the first point of existing grants, existing agreements, and things that fund. We know grants tend to be restricted, and they have very specific things they'll pay for or allow. We're very aware of these things. But the piece of any grant, whether it's a current award that you're in the process of, your grant budget is the plan that you've communicated you will do, right? And the program narratives that accompany that. The first step is to say, do we understand how in an agency-wide initiative, whether it's adoption of technology, or whether it's a new program, whatever it is, do we understand how that directly impacts this program, right? And I think we have to understand that. And then we have to update our budget to reflect the costs. And those come like this. We have to be more efficient. Any organization that wants to be more sort of technology forward, that means that we have to be as efficient in running our programs as possible. So generally, what we see that means is those fractional pieces of consultants and those sort of space fillers that inevitably fill up the contractual service line of the budgets, we're going to start squeezing that stuff. Not because we want to squeeze programs, we want to make them more effective. And we want to move those funds to more direct service, right? If we can further, more competitively pay our employees, adopt better technology to make our employees' lives easier, it starts to make sense. But we have to adjust the budgets today, right? We have to go through and we have to say, in this program, we can adopt it in this way, and we're going to revise the budgets and fund it. People are scared to do it. We're scared to revise budgets. That shouldn't be scary. We just need to revise them in due time. I think that's the first piece, Craig, of like, how do we manage current? We have to be willing to do that. If your organization doesn't have a budget revision process, you should. And then secondly, is the new grants. We don't need to just chase dollars for the sake of chasing dollars. That can get us in a lot of administrative headache and actually make our life harder. I think what we need to be able to do is, as we're doing our RFPs for additional funding, we need to specifically write into those the way we're operating today, not the pipe dream of how we want to operate tomorrow, but we need to get more of what we're doing today funded by more people, and that allows us more flexibility. And the third, the angel investor, those are amazing. I love those. As you know, Craig, you've seen it a bunch of times. The $500,000 gift that allows you to incur a one-time investment that doesn't fund it in perpetuity. You just have to be mindful of not only the adoption cost or the cost to implement, but how are you then going to carry that operating cost going forward? So just make sure those things are contemplated as you factor in. We can get seed money, but we have to be able to incorporate that into our recurring funding going forward to ensure it's sustainable.
I think you're going to build a bridge to the next thing that I've been hearing a lot more of with organizations of we've got board members who are super excited to talk about AI, may actually do some AI in their day job, but not really applicable as far as use case within human services. And AI itself, as far as like agentic and so forth, not being successful at alarming rate, like 80% failing, costing a ton of money. Boards are pressuring human services, just use some AI, add some AI. And I think there's a couple, or, and I'll let you sort of chime in or fill in. There's a few areas where it's like, okay, I hear the story, but there's two big things to consider. The AI that you're implementing is only as good as the processes that you're currently doing are able to write down and visually map. So the undergirding of the budget that you just described better be really damn good before you start layering on, rather than AI being the avenue by which we're going to get better. That gets mixed up and it gets potentially costly. So that's one of my questions to you. And then if you can help sort of as that moves into, let's assume you do greenlight all of that. Internal AI use cases are much more predictable as far as their funding model. They're usually included in software. They're usually included in those sort of fixed costs. But those, the unicorn that everybody's talking about and that these board members are like it's this thing that's in between our staff and the potential clients to make them more efficient, to save more time. All of that runs on a token economy and a consumption-based economy. So talk a little bit about how that's kind of the worst economy for a grant-based budget run organization, and how do you marry those two? Sorry, that's a lot to unpack. So maybe
Yeah.
start with the first and then we'll talk about the
Yeah.
back. But
No, that's,
they kind of go hand in glove when people are like, well, just use AI.
yeah. You're, I was thinking about it and thinking about conversations we've had, Craig, and other nonprofit leaders. And I was thinking back to a speech you gave as you reflected on, you were kind of a mechanical thinker, and like you would see things, and I was like, the best analogy I can give before I get into some of the weeds is power steering on a car. So you can drive a car without power steering. It's not going to be fun. It's going to cause a lot more work, and it's going to be a lot more taxing on the person in the car and the person driving. As I try to position AI and proper AI adoption, it's like power steering. It's not going to change the car. It's not going to change the people, and it shouldn't change the people inside the car, but it's going to make steering it a lot more efficient. And what that hopefully should do is free up the people who are getting burned out just trying to turn a steering wheel. Let them think more about where we're going, who we're serving, how are we doing these things. It doesn't change the car. So in this analogy, if you have a broken down car, throwing power steering in it, guess what? Your car still doesn't run. So it's not going to do you any good. And that's that's sort of how we're thinking about these things. And I think what we first have to understand, do we have mission clarity? Like, do we understand where we're going? Do we have a strategic plan, right? Is that strategic plan operationalized, right? Do we understand how we're actually living that out through our programs? Do we have a current org chart? Do we understand division of responsibilities and who's supposed to do what? If we don't have those things, we're not sophisticated or mature enough as an organization to start to adopt the AI in a manner that actually leads to sustainable and more effectively run organizations. And I think that is the tension. No one wants to acknowledge that their car is broken down. We have a lot of feelings about that. But it's until we acknowledge that your infrastructure is antiquated and disjointed, you don't have good data, you don't understand your processes, they're not documented, you rely on one person that just does everything, not going to be good for you. And that's, I think, We hear problem, we're like, oh, great, there's a solution, but we've not done the root cause of why does this problem actually exist? And how do we then build process that can be repetitious, and we understand the volume of those things, and then we start to deal with the consumption portion you just raised. You have to understand how much is it going to cost, how much is it used, is it predictable, those sorts of things. Is it secure? I know you think through all these things, Craig, but does that make sense sort of where I'm going with that? And that's sort of how I see it. And it's starting with we got to fix the car. And then let's add some power steering and can really take off and get this thing moving the way we want.
Makes perfect sense. And I think it's not fun to look yourself in the mirror. And I honestly think that right now, some of the conversations that we've been having with folks for the last, I don't know, let's say 2 years, really about all the same things, which were technology aside, you can't describe the process. Or yes, you have program related data, but even if we got that program related data out, it doesn't tell us anything more than you were programmatically compliant. The folks in the program met the requirements, but that doesn't really mean anything to the 12-year-old in the family, of which, unless you can see the household and how the data matters to the household and whether or not it impacted it, to tell the story to the world of we change families' lives. I'm like, no, you don't. I mean, you do, but you can't prove it. So how do we wrestle with, and those are hard, and we worked at an organization that had to change its name because we finally got to the place of, and once, I mean, it took several years of getting through the emotional part of the data review to get to it might have been more of a story than actually grounded in data, which there's nothing wrong with that. But we are so quick to worry about, well, that's going to be seen as failure or negative. And it's that part, I think, is ironically that human side of it is going to be the Achilles heel to AI adoption, which I don't even know where that makes me land philosophically, spiritually, or wherever around one's ability to be humble when looking themselves in the mirror, when really reflecting on the data of who they are, has everything to do with how much they can advance. And this AI thing has really pushed the envelope of, cool, I'll talk with you, but are you ready to listen and go back and do the work?
Yes, you're spot on. I think that's where, obviously, having seen the work of Provisio up close in understanding those things, and not just running to a destination just for the sake of the destination, but understanding the importance of the process and how we build structures along the process so that we can tell that story, we can capture the relevant data in the right context, and then we can fund it and we can know what those things need to cost, and how much we utilize them. I think that's why that partnership matters so much, for this conversation around why do we need to invest in it. I think is the thing. Like you don't just layer on a new technology on a bad system and expect it to work. It's silly that we're still repeating that. I think, but I mean, you know it, Craig, right? Not to sound callous by any means, but sometimes this is the finance people. We get to be this role. If you are approaching a decision and you're unwilling to disrupt anything you're doing, so you're like, I can do this, but I don't want to change anything, we're gonna have a hard time.
Yes. Well, I want you to pay for it, but I don't want to have to change what I do. And the thing that we buy is supposedly going to make it better. And it's like, how?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, if we can't make that case to a funder, if we can't make that case to our board or to our leadership teams, we're still at the starting blocks.
I think something that's going to be an interesting word that's going to get some nuance that resonates both financially and operationally is this concept of sustainability. All too often we worry about and think about innovation and adoption. And I find I like that now we are starting to name the reasons why AI is failing in its first use cases. And there are several folks that are identifying this space in between the people in the technology, i.e., the process and the understanding of the system, as the adoption layer or the socio-technical layer, where what I think it really means underneath of it all is how do you create this so that it becomes a sustainable part of the fabric of which your organization is bound, so that it isn't no longer a project that we celebrate and high five at go live, versus it's sustainable and it is now organizationally part of our culture. How do we shift, or where? Because it's a financial, it's a cultural, it's a technology. Like, how does the finance team and how does funding help shape the the reimagining of this cost center?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think maybe one way that we try and coach our teams up on this is to think of it that grants fund outcomes. Technology helps us deliver outcomes in a more efficient, effective, and sustainable way, right? So if we anchor to outcomes, and if we don't understand the outcomes of our program, that's the earlier point you already raised.
Mm-hmm.
But we're funding outcomes, and I think as we think about these things, about this whole sustainability question, I think the first question that the federal guidance gives us is it necessary, right? And we have to be able to document and support why this technology is necessary, right? And if we've done our work to say yes, it's necessary because we have the process, we have the infrastructure to support this as a vital piece of our program. It's necessary. Is it reasonable, right? Are we not charging $5 million for something that we could get for 50,000? Of course. Is it allocable? Meaning, can we figure out how many clients are using it and allocate that portion of the cost to that program? And then do we do it consistently, right? Do we take that methodology and apply it across all of our programs? Those I just walked through are the 4 tests within the Code of Financial Regulations of how to fund these things. And so I think as we approach sustainability, it's because we haven't done the work to say, yes, it's necessary. Here's how we've integrated it. And when we do those things, we then have a much clearer path to say, board or funder or finance team, here's the priority, here's the cost pool. And we know 80% of this needs to be funded through our reimbursable grants. And then we're working with what's remaining for some of the discretionary type spending and those things. And that's I think the best path we've been on to help support that. Sustainability starts with understanding that and applying it.
Yeah, it makes me think a lot about the other things that we think about in human services that I think are different than the commercial world or other worlds, where you can work towards establishing causation and you can work towards creating interventions that have that causation and built-in sustainability in them, because we know, medically speaking, if you have this, we can treat it with that. And where human behavior and human services doesn't work quite like that. I can teach as much as I want to teach. Whether or not the kindergartner is ready or not doesn't entirely have to do with me. In the way I measure the outcomes and the way that I measure the resources that I need to do that, requires, I think, that same methodology of using those 4 tests of, and what we call in the social services, social science world, of correlation, or that causal pathway, rather than causation and correlation. There's a middle ground. That how do we get on that path that we can see and say, because we know this and we know that it equals that, we can keep building and we can keep layering, because there is no A plus B equals C. That's just not how it works. But there is a pathway and there is a mindset. And I love the idea that you had those 4 tenets from the CFR that ground all of the decision making. I think marrying that to some sort of doctrine within your organization around how, why, and what we fund. Not just the people, I think very often, and it's very easy because we don't fund people for crap inside of human services. So it's very easy to be like, wages suck. We all know that. But beyond that, how do
Mhm.
you apply that same structure to the non-people stuff around this is why we need to do this and working like how how do you think those might learn from one another as we try to create a more sustainable case for technology? Because I mean, the example you gave at the top of the hour of talking was the COVID example, right? We did that because COVID happened. Let's hope that it doesn't take another pandemic to create
Right.
more innovation and change in human services than I saw in the previous 20 years of my working life. How would we do it absent a pandemic? And it sounds like maybe this sort of ideological change might be a path to do that.
Yeah, yeah. You hit on a couple of things. I think there's alignment, and we can find a lot of alignment in the human services and the social services on a couple of issues, right? We think our teams are overworked and underpaid, and the funding model kind of perpetuates that, right? I think we pretty all universally agreed to that that's a problem. And I think one of the things is just as leaders, kind of setting aside the sort of financial piece for a second, is how do we address some of the things that really impact the efficacy of our programs? Technology is one of them, but employee burnout, employee morale, employee retention, all of these things, right? Especially in the social services. If we are able to make a case and position technology not as an added cost, but as an efficiency that will lead to long-term savings. It will. Short term, it's not going to. So that we know that. But long term, and the reason isn't to just go buy more technology. The reason is to serve your clients more effectively, but also resource your employees. There has to be a shift. We can't just start to plug in extra grant dollars with fractional employees and continue this pattern of like overworking and burning out people in this industry. And in order to shift that, I think in order to see that, we have to say that's hard. We know funding is going to be 15 years probably, or take a black swan event to try and change it. I think we have to start to see technology not as an added cost. It is going to be an investment without a doubt. The same way a building, the same way a new equipment is, but that will lead to long-term efficiency. And when we do that work, I think the two groups of people that benefit the most from that are your constituency that you're serving and in your employees, because you'll be able to provide more competitive benefits, higher rate, higher wages, and serve your clients better. And I think that to me is the business case. And I think how we approach why we should make these investments and why we should start to make the incremental changes as we move forward. And, this is not everyone's favorite topic and probably not the way to sell this, but it sometimes means there's going to be fewer FTEs in a department or in a program. And that's not because technology replaced them. That's not it at all. It's because your system and your process was very inefficient. Um, some things can be at odds, but that's really the issue. It's not the technology or the AI tools. It's you've built a system that's predicated on manual processes. And then when one person or one piece gets removed, the process slows down. What happens when that happens? Clients aren't served. They don't get the support they need. We got to solve that. So we could go all day on that, but does that make sense? That to me is the ultimate business case for it. And I think how we've got to start to position and build towards that.
You know how much I love Charles Deming. So,
Yep.
and probably I'm already going to say your system is uniquely designed to produce the results it does. Doesn't mean they're good. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means it was designed that way. Now, whether or not you would redo it differently today or whatever the case may be, I think the real gist of it is let's not be alarmed, amazed, or bewildered as how did we get here? Well, it doesn't really matter, but the thing that's in front of you is producing the stuff that you're seeing. And if you want to change it, all of it has to change, just not a part of it or a person, but all of it.
Yep.
And that's really That's where I think sustainability comes in, and we miss the boat of we think we just need to fund that one big magic bullet or intervention or whatever, and the system will respond. And it's like, no, system is going to get shocked for a minute, might get pissed off and revolt, and maybe it lasts, but the system itself is going to go back to being what it was, which probably is not financially sustainable. And so around and around we go, which is why I was like, well, how do you get out of that path? And that's where we're going. The last thing I want to ask you and kind of talk about is in this world of, let's assume you were successful and your processes were written down in such a way that you could prove you knew what you were doing. They were mapped so people could actually see themselves. You were able to get that into some form of technology, and let's pretend you were using AI in some form or fashion during an intake. And let's assume that even though that's a consumption-based model, you figured out how to pay for it. Lots and lots of assumptions, but let's assume someday someone and we get to that place. We then have this next sort of financial operational conundrum, which is now that you have increased the volume of folks that are coming through the front door by 20% who are eligible for your programs, as the finance guy, are you high-fiving everybody in the room like the program people are, or are you beginning to wonder, that's awesome, but our system is not designed to handle 20%, and we have not applied the right financial discipline to all of the downstream? How do you, as the finance guy, say, hey, has anybody thought about, do we have enough staff to deliver the services for all the new people we just brought in, or we'll worry about that later? Like how do you bring that together if people aren't seeing it?
Yeah, you're spot on, and that's a hard thing to do. And I think there's generally speaking, yes, we hope to have that conversation before the people are in there and waiting to be served, and we know that's a huge problem, right? But I think there's a vital question to ask. Can we monetize the demand? And that sounds very corporate. Can we serve the demand is another sort of softer language, but do we have the means by way of, can we actually perform the services, right? Or can we scale up incrementally as the service or as the demand increases? If we do not have a pipeline to do those things, we really should ask different questions about, are we filling a pipeline that we cannot then serve? And if that is the answer, we ought to either ask different questions about partnership. I think there's great organizations that have capacity potentially, but I think that you're exactly right. It doesn't have to mean we have to do it all. But as you know, that plagues this industry so much is this mindset that we have to do it. It's a very competitive, we're fighting for dollars. And if we could shift that paradigm to more of a collaborative model, to say, hey, we have adopted this really great intake process that allows us to get more people connected to a provider and build the provider networks, and that we ought to be able to then connect them with a provider that maybe not isn't one that we're employing or something that we're billing. I think you can really start to see some sustainable change. But you're so spot on that we have to not only get the person supported or in the door, but we have to be able to support them and actually render the services. And if we haven't thought through that labor model, we ought not do it. We've seen this actually not with full AI adoption, but we've seen this with just systems improvements, right? I mean, we've seen it on data projects that partners like Provisio have done, that it's amazing. And you understand what's working, where you can scale. These are all beautiful opportunities, but you have to figure out the support piece of it. How do you build the labor to get the pipeline of people to do that? And if not, you have some credibility challenges, which no one wants to face.
Yeah, and we trade in trust in human services. That is the number one commodity. All the rest of it, I mean, you can say outcomes, whether impact. We can talk all day about what that word means anymore. It doesn't mean, I don't really care, but it all boils down to whether or not people trust you. And I don't see that changing. At least I hope not. Otherwise, I'm going to have a really hard time working in the human services world if trust isn't the number one. Um, and I guess that's why I don't work in other worlds
Yeah.
and commercial spaces and other things around. That's just not at the heart of the work that we do. Of people got to believe you, and they gotta see that, which is sometimes hard in technology and finance people. Uh, to come off as that authentic person, right? That is really there to be supportive. And I think you talked about something that is hard. Of you, what do you mean we're going to give a referral to somebody else? Um, but I think that goes back to are you focused on being of high quality, or do you have some misnomer in the idea of being impactful that has to do with volume rather than quality? And that might be where things go off. Just if you can help piggyback on the part of, so thinking internally, imagine you're inside of an organization of, you got to go talk to that board, you got to go talk to the C-suite that had the idea to get the chatbot or the whatever it is on the intakes to increase the intakes, to say that all sounds great, but let's assume we're more successful than we are today
Mm-hmm.
outside of being more efficient. Like that seems to be the thing where people are like, oh, well, efficient. We got more time. And as you said, time for what? For how? I heard somebody bring something up. It was on a podcast or something around, you know, people ending meetings like, oh, we'll give you back 15 minutes. And this person was basically like, what does that do? Like, think about your daily life. How much do you break down into 7 or 8 or 15-minute chunks? So when we talk about giving time back to people, it's like, unless it's a couple hours and it's predictable and it's dedicated so that you can replace it with different behaviors, yes, it's efficiency. Yes, we buy back that time, but I think we need to be a bit realistic about how much the world's going to change with all this newfound 15 minutes here or there every other Tuesday. But if we think about sort of that intake process, right? How do you have that conversation with that organization and board around, yes, and yes, we can afford this. Yes, we'll do it. And let's assume we're just kind of successful. What does that
Uh-huh.
mean? And what does it cost? Like in inside that house, how do you have those conversations?
Yeah. It's I think there's two things. From a cost perspective, we have to be able to, one, get really clear on the actual cost, the real cost. People want to know that. Like, we can't give ballparks and be transparent about that. Not only how's it going to cost, how are we going to fund it, and how are we going to fund it in a go forward basis, right? Those are, I think, pretty black and white things that we can, hey, get really clear on what's going to cost, how much you're going to use it, and how you're going to fund it in future years. Straightforward. I think the other piece is, though, like is, if our only argument is an efficiency argument and not an efficacy argument, we've got to do some more work. We
Mhm.
should be able to show, how does it make us more efficient, and how does that allow us to be more effective, to live our mission with more fidelity, to serve more people more effectively. That piece, if you get to that, right, it's not just about, hey, we don't have to have one more person because we adopt a new technology. That's not a compelling case. Don't make that case. Um, what a compelling case is, it may even be more expense, but it allows us to be more efficient, to steward our resources, our people, and our mission well. And when we, I think, connect all those three pieces, what's the cost? How are we going to fund it? Two, what's the impact on our people, like our staff? How does that make their job easier, and how does this align with our mission to make sure that our mission is being honored and lived out with fidelity? Those three pieces, I think, allow the internal adoption of that to be, I think, pretty pretty successful. I think, to take it one step further, I think when we get clear on that and we have maybe even some added capacity, maybe we're really successful in the scenario you just alluded to, Craig, and we can have more people we can refer work out. That actually just allows us to be part of a greater solution to a
Mhm.
community need. And that's the whole point of us as nonprofits, right? And I think I have yet to see a board member that's seen those three pieces and not been like, how can I support and help move that forward?
Well, thank you, Mr. Shue, for joining me today on what's going to be the first episode of the funding mini-series. In the next episode, we're going to move into the more relational side of funding, how leaders build with trust, with funders, grant administrators, and the people who influence what flexibility is possible. Dr. Juanita Reynolds, Chief Program Officer at Child Action, will be our guide for that conversation. This is the Resilient Human Services Leader, and thank you very much for listening.